Hello, thank you so much for having me here. Today I'll be talking about data management and data analysis using an example of Leigh syndrome global patient registry that we have with courts. My name is Sophia Zilber. I'm a patient registry director and a board member for Mito Foundation. Mito is a parent-led 100% volunteer-run foundation that's dedicated to advancing education and research for Leigh syndrome and mitochondrial disease. Professionally, I work in pharmaceutical industry where I work on statistical programming, analysis, and preparing data for regulatory submissions. 5 years ago, my newborn daughter Miriam died from Leigh syndrome, which is a devastating rare disease, and I've been volunteering a lot and helping in her memory in rare disease community. I have to share that after my daughter died and when I started to volunteer and help, I have never previously had any experience, any personal experience with rare disease or really with any disease. I didn't know anything about patient advocacy groups. I didn't know that patient groups collect data or that they run registries. So it's really been new for me as well and really has been a learning experience for me too. And one thing I've noticed is that in the patient advocacy community, there's a lot of attention given to starting registries, collecting data, but I guess not as much to what happens to the data after. Typically, when we work with data, collecting data is very important, but it's really just one of the steps. What else happens with the data is also extremely critical in order to get really meaningful results and for the data to be useful. And so my presentation today will focus on that. And I hope it will be interesting. I have to say this is a really big topic, so I'm not going to cover everything that's possible to cover on this topic. I will highlight some of the things that I hope will be interesting, and this conversation can always continue. This is my disclaimer. I just want to be clear that everything I'm sharing are my own views and my own experiences. So why is this important? Why is it important to talk about data analysis, how to work with data? Why is this conversation important? So I am sharing a quote here from a very well-known book, 7 Habits of Highly Effective People. It says, begin with the end in mind. I think in the book, the quote didn't really apply to data, but it really applies here as well. So what is our end goal when we are starting a registry? What is our end goal? Well, we want the data that we collect to help patients, right? We want to collect data that's useful, that can be interpreted. And so this is something that's really important to keep in mind from the very beginning, from the very first steps. When we think about data that is high quality, we typically think about something called data integrity. And here is some principles that we think about. Completeness. So we want data to be complete. We don't want there to be a lot of missing data. Consistency. So we want different questions that we collect, for example, in our surveys, to be consistent with each other. And accuracy. We want our data to be correct, to be accurate. So this is something to think about as I'm showing you next slides. When I think about working with a particular registry platform, one of the first things that I would do is I would normally ask to see a data dictionary. Data dictionary is a set of information that describes the structure of the data. The data dictionary that you see here above is a most typical data dictionary, and this is what we also see in courts registry. In this example, each column in the data corresponds to a particular question or particular element that we are collecting. And when a patient enrolls, this patient will have a row of data. If the patient comes back, let's say a few months later, and fills out the survey again, this patient will have a second row of data and so on. This data is pretty easy, straightforward to use. It could be used with either software packages such as SAS or R, or even Excel is normally sufficient to work with this data. Another format that I have seen is here below. This format is very different. In this format, each question in the survey corresponds to a row. So let's say if patient comes in and patient fills out a survey with 50 questions, this patient will have 50 rows of data. If, let's say, a few months later, that patient comes in again and they fill out a survey a second time, then they're going to have 100 rows of data at that point. And you can multiply that by the number of patients. So you can imagine this will be a very, very long data set. This kind of data set is much harder to work with. So as an example, in the one that's on top, anyone can easily filter this. So if we want to see how many patients we have of a particular age, or from a specific city or country, or we can use it for both. So let's say we want to see patients of a particular age and a specific race. At the same time, we can easily filter this in Excel. We cannot easily filter this data in the second example. This really requires an experienced data analyst to work with this data and produce correct results. So why am I showing this? Because this is a very first step. And so this is something we would want to see before we even start on a particular registry platform to identify, is this the right platform for us? Do we have a way to report results the way we want to? Do we need additional resources? And basically make a plan that will work for us. Next topic is the survey in our registry. Survey is so incredibly important when we are thinking about the quality of the resulting data. And I want to show a few features where a survey could result in data that either has a lot of missing data or data is not very accurate. First one is when the survey is too long. This can result in responses that many missing responses. It could be difficult for patients to fill out. Next is sometimes it's not clear if the questions refer to a caregiver or a patient. In some cases, the questions are not relevant. So for example, if we are asking if a child can walk, if the child is a baby and is too young to walk, the answer might be no, but that doesn't mean that there's anything wrong. There also might be inaccurate response options. So for example, if we're asking for age, we might ask for units in years or months, but in some cases, we also need to ask for example, for weeks or days. Also, some types of information are very difficult to capture accurately in patient-reported data, such as dates, lab results, doses of medications. So it's important to think, do we want to collect this information or not? Will we be able to interpret this data? For example, in our register, we are not collecting this information at all, besides for a genetic test. Next, collecting information that isn't needed. So sometimes it seems like the more information we collect, the better it is, but in reality, that's not necessarily true. It's not always the best practice when it comes to data quality. The better practice is really to think about each question we are asking and think, does this information add value? Is this something that we need? Is this something we'll be able to interpret? And really think about it from that perspective. Also, there might be some questions that are not applicable to a subgroup of participants. For example, in our registry and in many others, we are asking those whose loved ones have passed away to still enroll them into the registry. But we also have to be clear in our questions. Sometimes we may need to put in instructions if the question should be skipped, or how does it apply to those who have already died. So this is very important. And another item here is sometimes it's not clear if the question is asking the current time or the prior history. So it's important to ask what kind of a response are we looking for, what are we trying to collect. So one example in our registry, we are asking what type of mobility devices patients have used, such as a wheelchair, a walker, or other types. We are asking about the entire history. What have they ever used? So of course, had we asked what they're currently using, we would get very different responses. So this is important to think about and ask the question exactly in a way that reflects what specifically you're trying to what specifically you're trying to get, what information you're looking for. So I want to show a couple of examples from our registry. In this question, we are asking, did the participant lose the ability to sit up? So we are giving an option as too young for this activity. So if we're talking about a baby, they can select this option because the baby might be just too young to sit. We also have an option never did this activity, since we have some children who have never learned to sit up. So this way we are trying to give response options that will result in data that's accurate and reflects all possible responses. Additionally, we are asking at what age the participant lose the ability to sit up, and we're giving different units such as days, weeks, months, or years. So actually in this question, days or weeks are probably not as critical, but we have other questions such as, did the participant lose ability to swallow? And there we really do need the days and weeks. We're also clarifying if the participant is deceased, how to respond to this question. This is another example. So we are asking, has the participant needed to use a mobility device? And we're giving several options. So what I want to point out here is that this the lower section with the options is grayed out or unavailable for answer unless the answer is yes. So this is something that we are doing to make sure that we have greater consistency among the responses to different questions. Another important thing to consider is how the participants enroll into the registry. So the part above shows the enrollment in CORD's registry. The enrollment in CORD is based on the participant, which is a person with the disease. So in this case, you can see either someone is enrolling themselves if they are the ones who have the disease, or they're enrolling their child, or they're enrolling an adult for whom they're a legal guardian. In this type of enrollment, we are only collecting the most necessary information about a caregiver, such as their name, their contact information, and their relationship to participant. In some other platforms, there is another type of enrollment, which I'm calling here caregiver-based enrollment. It doesn't actually have that name. It's just something I'm using to be able to explain it. This enrollment is based on the person opening the account. So it might be a patient, it might be a caregiver, it could be both a patient and a caregiver. And in some cases, the person opening the account could even identify themselves as more than one of these options or all three of these options. Usually in this case, the person who opens the account is also being asked demographic and other information about themselves. So this is really not based on the patient with the disease. This is based on the person opening the account. I personally very much prefer the enrollment based on the participant or the person with the disease. I think it's much more clear. If I was working with a registry that has this type of enrollment based on a caregiver or based on the person opening the account, I personally would want to look at the data carefully just to make sure that the data makes sense and that we are not accidentally representing caregiver information as patient information. So it should be very clear, is this a caregiver data that we are looking at, or is this a patient? Is this the person who has the disease whose data we are looking at? When should we start data analysis? I believe the best is to start right away. As soon as you have one enrolled patient, that's a great time to start. Why should you start doing data analysis early? What are the benefits of it? There are a lot of advantages and benefits to starting data analysis right away. You can significantly improve your survey. For example, you can identify questions where many responses are missing and find out maybe these questions are being misunderstood. You can find questions where responses are inconsistent and you can possibly make a change to these questions. You can find questions where you might have inaccurate response options. For example, let's say you're asking for a free text response, but really it would be better to create categories. You can find out if your data captures patient population inaccurately. So, for example, you're getting most patients as adults, but you know that the disease mostly affects children. So you can identify that early, and you can find out why. You can also be well prepared for later, for when you're getting a lot more data. And also you can have results available to show to researchers at any time. So for us, it's been very helpful. We have all results summarized. We've had situations where a researcher has asked us to see the data to understand what the registry is doing. He wanted to understand if it reflects our patient population correctly. And so it was really important and very useful to have everything available and everything right there that we could show, and so much more. There are really so many more benefits. So again, I want to show a couple of examples from our registry. Here is one of the questions. It's asking, in the past 3 months, how many times the participant has been admitted to the hospital for at least one night. When we were creating our survey, we didn't know at all what kind of responses we are going to get. We didn't have even approximate idea. So we decided to leave this as a free text field. After we've seen some data, we changed this. And now we have categories here, 0, 1, 2, 3, 4 more, and then if 4 more, they can specify. And so this fits our data much better. Another 2 examples. One is regarding race. It was interesting, but we found that patients from one of the countries in our registry have mostly chosen other unknown for the race. And so it turned out that actually they were misunderstanding this question, because race is not necessarily a global concept. It's not understood the same everywhere in the world. And so we have explained it to them, and actually many of them went back and they corrected it. And so we have a more complete data for this question now. Another question is about genetic mutation. Genetic mutation is difficult to capture in patient-reported data, and we knew this. And to make this a little bit easier, we've had these examples here right from the beginning, and we asked the patients to be as precise as possible, to reach out for us for help. But despite that, this data really comes in all kinds of different ways. Some patients just write their variant and not the gene. Some write the gene and not the variant. Some write a whole sentence. And so because we've been able to see this data very early, we actually came up with a little algorithm on what are we doing with this data. So we take it and we actually recode it ourselves to a way that's consistent and that makes sense and that we can present. So again, looking at the data early really helps. If you see the data for the first time after, let's say, a year or several years, it's much more difficult. It's much more difficult to make any change to the survey, and it's much more difficult to go through this type of information that really needs very careful attention to detail. There is also a concept such as data QC or quality control. It is a process that provides assurance that the data and reported results are credible and accurate. So, for example, when we are working on the clinical trial, we would usually want to have 2 people who are completely independent and cannot see each other's work come up with exactly the same number for each number that we report. Of course, we can't do this in a patient registry. First of all, we don't need to. We also don't have this type of resources. But still, if you're working on a publication, such as a poster or a paper, it's still good to have some level of QC. So in our case, we were working on a poster, which I'll show in a couple of slides. And so one of our patient registry advisors, who is a very experienced data analyst, has been able to do this QC for us. And so again, one thing I want to say is that it's really, really good idea to have resources on your team who have expertise in data, who have technical expertise. One question that comes up a lot among patient groups is, can data be combined with data in other registries? So what I would say to that is, if you want to combine data with data in other registries, here are the questions to ask. Do both registries ask the same exact questions? Are the response options to those questions exactly the same? Are the variable names the same? If the answer is no to at least one question, then it depends. Combining data is a manual process and it takes a lot of work. You would have to go through each question and find out if it can be combined or not. So you can see an example I'm showing here with 4 registries. Registry 1 is asking for biological sex and the options are female and male. Registry 2 is asking for biological sex as well, but the responses are coded with 1 letters, F and M. Registry 3 is also asking for the same thing, but in this case, the variable is numeric. It's called sex N, and the responses are coded as 1 and 2. And the registry 4 is asking for self-identified gender, and the response options are different altogether. Can you combine this question in these 4 registries? You can combine registries 1, 2, and 3, but before you combine it, you would have to recode these responses to make sure they're exactly the same and that this variable name is exactly the same in all 3. Only after that you can combine. The 4th registry you probably cannot combine because it's asking a question that means something different. So again, this is not a quick process. Sometimes you can combine, sometimes you can't, sometimes you can combine some questions and not others, but most of the time you might need to do some recoding and renaming of some variables, and it takes time. It's a real effort. In courts registry, the general survey in courts is based on the NIH Common Data Elements, and courts has the same exact survey for all registries that are using courts platform. And so in this case, since it's exactly the same survey with exactly the same questions and response options, that data can of course be combined and harmonized, and yes, it could be harmonized across rare diseases. So this is our poster that shows our first patient registry findings. We are very, very proud of this poster. It was presented in February at a mitochondrial disease conference. I'm not going to go through the entire poster in detail, but I do want to show a few interesting findings. So what is interesting here on this slide? Well, one thing is diagnosis determined by genetic testing for over 94%. Of those, also for about 94%, we know their exact mutation. So that's really important to us because we want to use the registry to reach out to patients to inform them about clinical trials. And for clinical trials, we need a genetic confirmation of the diagnosis. So we wanted to see this. Another interesting finding is time from symptom onset to diagnosis. In some other research in mitochondrial disease, it was determined that the time is pretty long. In our registry, it's actually really relatively short. So 30% of patients have it as under 6 months. 30% of patients have it between 6 and 12 months. Only about 6% have it over 5 years. So that's very interesting, and we'll see if this changes as we collect more data. Otherwise, if we look at some of the other findings here, such as patient's age at diagnosis, symptoms, loss of milestones, disease management, overall, we are seeing results that are consistent with what we know about this disease. So that's really important for us to know. We know that the data we are collecting reflects our patient population well. So, and we know that we are on the right track with this registry. So this is really important to know as early as we can, so that if something is not quite right, we can change it. Here I'm sharing some of the graphics that we've been sharing on social media. So besides for formal sharing, such as a poster, we really share a lot on social media. I think that's really good. It really engages the patients. It really tells the patients that we care about this registry, that we're working hard on it, and it builds our relationship with the community. And you can see one graphic here that we shared when we reached 100 patients. So we did this congratulations graphic. So I would really, really recommend to share with your community as much as you can. I do data analysis in SAS. If anyone listening is interested in learning more about SAS, SAS actually has a lot of free tutorials on their website, and so please feel free to go and look. I have a link here on the slide. Another really huge and important topic is transparency. Transparency is so incredibly important. I'm showing a quote here from a book called Registries for Evaluating Patient Outcomes, a User's Guide. There's a link here, it's on NIH website. And the quote says, registry developers could promote transparency by making the registry's scientific objectives, governance, eligibility criteria, sampling and recruitment strategies, general operating protocol, and sources of data available to anyone who is interested. So that is very true. This quote is very true. I agree with it 100%. So when it comes to transparency, what is the information that is important to disclose? So here I'm showing you some of the things that I believe are very important to disclose. Purpose of the registry, why is our registry there? There could be various reasons to have registries, such as it might be just to contact patients, it might be to do research, it might be to engage or build a stronger community. These are all very valid reasons, but it's important to be transparent and explain why. What information are we collecting? How were the surveys developed? One tip actually I wanted to bring up here is because for us, one of the important reasons for our registry is we wanted it to be useful for clinical trials. We actually reached out and asked a company who is conducting clinical trials on our disease to provide some input on what they would like to see, what kind of questions they would like us to ask. And so that feedback has been extremely valuable to us. How will data be used by our foundation? What is the purpose of any medical records that we ask to upload? So again, as I showed in one of the first slides, it's important to have a reason for any information that we collect, especially something as important as medical records. How can data be accessed? Who makes decisions on data access? How is data protected? Will the results be shared with the patients? We really try to live up to these principles, and so you can check our FAQ, our frequently asked questions, on our website, and you can read them. And I really believe that if this information is not disclosed or not available, patients should ask for it. The more questions patients ask, the more accountable we will be, and the better data we will be, the better we'll be able to help and advance treatments and research and help patients. I would like to end with a quote that I really like. It says, act as if what you do makes a difference. It does. This quote helps me, and in general, I collect quotes. If others have other quotes that inspire them, I would love to know what they are as well. Thank you so much for listening to my presentation, and thank you, Quartz, for being an incredible partner to us. If anyone has any questions, any comments, any discussion topics, I would love to hear from everyone. Please reach out to me at sophia@curemito.org. You can also connect with me on LinkedIn. I'd be very happy to be connected. And also please follow Cure Mito Foundation through any social media you would like. Thank you so much.